Hey everybody. Okay, I'm doing something a little different. I'm already tipsy. Mm. Welcome to I swear to drunk I'm not God, and this is Britt Perkins. Hey y'all. I yeah, I'm cool. I'm cool. I'm chilling. I'm chilling, And no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just joking. So today I am drunk, but I'm just saying, like, I'm just kind of joking. Today we're gonna talk about, some craziness. We're in Black History Month, y'all. Welcome to Black History Month. This episode today is my contribution to such a terrible joke. My contribution to Black History Month. Today we got a black douchebag that we're talking about. But what do I want to talk about? What have you all been doing? Oh, so did you enjoy Indian Predator? I know a few of you listened to it. I hope you all enjoyed that. I have been watching. I've been good. I'm good. I'm still working through it. I'm working on putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. But what was I about to say? I'm having a brain fart. Oh, but I wanted to do an episode on this dude. Wait, was that what I was talking about? God, I don't remember what I was talking about. This is really sad. Oh, so, okay. All right, Brittany, get your shit together. So I'm having a decent, you know what I mean? Like I'm putting Humpty Dumpty back together again. That's what I was saying. And, it's taking a lot of work, but I've had to distance myself a little bit and focus on me. Just focus on me. I also, I went to go like see some plays, some shows. I'm talking to like some new people here and there, and it's but it's whatever. Y'all ain't come for a therapy session. But I will say that I have been watching just for, something funny is Don't Call Me White Girl, which I just absolutely adore her. And I've been watching funny Marco videos on YouTube, and they tickle the fuck out of me. I can't express that enough. The reason why I mentioned that, though, and now my memory is serving me a little bit better. The reason why I mentioned that is on Indian Predator, I mentioned that it's like Indian, it's Hindu tradition or whatever for them to want to dispose of their bodies in, I think, 24, 72 hours, something like that. But it was funny. It came up on Don't Call Me White Girl because she's a Muslim by faith. And she mentioned it that Muslims have a rule like that as well. So that was interesting because I was like, oh, learning. But no, anyway, so Don't Call Me White Girl is funny as absolute fuck. I can't even stress that enough. Her voice is so cool and she just tickles me. Every time I'm in a funk, I basically just watch her interview she did with Funny Marco, because I think his humor is amazing. It's wonderful to kind of get like a Between Two Ferns version of like that pranky that pranky comedy where, I don't know. Check out YouTube it. Between Two Ferns, Zach Galifianakis. It's amazing. Anyway, okay. So bring your energy up. I'm sorry. I'm also a little stoned. So there's a couple of things happening here. So today, we're going to talk about the Grim Sleeper. Now, I don't know if anybody knows who he is. I'm sure that a lot of people do. I don't know if anybody that's listening knows who he is. Sometimes when I mention the Grim Sleeper, people seem surprised. The reason why I said this was my contribution to Black History Month is because he's black. He was a god-awful individual, but he's a character that I found out about from a documentary that was on HBO called The Tales of the Grim Sleeper. And that documentary was just good. It was interesting, very interesting, because I had never had heard of him before. So that had to be 2014, 2015 when I saw that doc. And so I've known about him for a while. And it's interesting too, because we're, up until 2020 when he passed away, it was kind of, he was a part of like our news, you know what I mean? Like he like modern day news, even though he had been busy for almost 25 years. So anyway, you're gonna learn about him today. Yay, whoop-de-doo. The Grim Sleeper. He goes by the name of Lonnie Franklin. And you know, it's interesting too, because that whole situation, you know, again happened in LA. And for some, I don't know why I'm on an LA trip. The next one is probably gonna be LA too. Because I did Easy E, then I did My Trees, now I'm doing The Grim Sleeper. And then the next one, I'm not going to tell you what that one is, but the next one I got planned, I think that one is going to be surprising to people. The next one is going to be more surprising to people, honestly. I think that a lot of people they're not going to know as much as I found out about this dude. So I'm actually excited about episode 11. And by the way, we're in episode 10, bitches. Like, what? Like, ain't even been that long, you know? Anyway, so we're in episode 10. So this is the Grim Sleeper. And what am I drinking? I am drinking a drink that I found on liquor.com called the Green Beast. And the reason why I'm kind of like mellow is because one, I go to the Zen Leaf, excuse me, not the THC Center, get my little pen on, you know, but also I'm drinking the Green Beast, which has an absinthe in it. And absinthe is kind of one of those spirits that I feel like presses my energy down a little bit, not like in a sleepy way, but just in a like I'm chilling way. So I'm going to bring it up I'll bring up the energy as we go. But this is why I don't like to start these things already tipsy. But anyway, so we're drinking the Green Beast. Now the Green Beast is absinthe, simple syrup, lime juice, cold water. That's it. Cucumbers. I put cucumbers in it as well. It's supposed to have cucumbers in it. It's super fucking refreshing. It'll be a great absinthe cocktail for the summer. It's obviously not a traditional absinthe cocktail because that's just sugar and water. But this one, and believe it or not, this time I also used simple syrup. I literally use simple syrup. Simple syrup is something I usually stay away from because agave nectar is just a little more, you know, girlish figure friendly. But I use simple syrup today because I don't know if any of you all have ever had absinthe, but absinthe tastes like licorice. So if you're not a fan of licorice, then you're probably not going to be a fan of absinthe. But you probably be surprised how many of your favorite cocktails at certain restaurants have a little absinthe in them, or absinthe rinse, or just like a less, you know, licoricey or anise taste, you know, of absinthe. So anyway, whatever, shut up. But that is the Green Beast. Okay. Muddle it in a cup with some simple syrup, or, you know, smash it however the fuck you need to smash it. Open that juice up. You know what I mean? Kind of add that cucumber note to the syrup. Then you want to put in 1 shot of everything basically except water. So absinthe, lime juice, and simple syrup. You pour that in, and then you want to make sure that you have 4 ounces of chilled water, and boom, you got yourself a Green Beast. I fuck with it. I like it a lot. I happen to be one of those assholes who sometimes like go to bars and like make the drink, be like, okay, so could you add that and that and that? I'm like that. So anyway, so all right, let's get into it. So the Grim Sleeper. Now, I don't like this man. I didn't like researching this man. I read a book, and I'll tell you what that is. It's in the show notes too. Then I watched a couple documentaries. You know, I read some filings. My go-to too is like Murderpedia, and then I like have to double check to make sure Murderpedia is not wrong. Sometimes you find little details on it. You're like, what the fuck is that? That wasn't in there. But if it wasn't in a book, then I don't fuck with it. You know. I read a book, 2 documentaries, and then, you know, obviously I read a bunch of news articles and shit like that. And this is a very interesting tale. Again, I learned about him from Tales of the Grim Sleeper, which is a documentary that was premiered on HBO. And I was confused because I had never heard of him before. So he California had a period where they were just, like LA specifically, was just doing a lot. Just doing a lot. And I'm gonna correct myself real quick. Another California case was technically Colleen Stan, because her kidnapping also happened in California. What I'm learning is that there was this period, and I don't know if it's just the warm weather, that opens up serial killers, and because California also has a LA. And California also have a pretty high crime rate, and it makes sense. They take up most of the Western Seaboard. But California has this very hippie, you know what I mean? Just like open to anyone accepting culture about it. And I think that California can sometimes attract derelicts and things like that. And honestly, from back in the psychedelic days, I think some of that residual shit is from that as well. Because a lot of people, obviously they had the Vietnam War. You had this very this funky period where everything was about love and peace, you know what I mean? Like the Haight-Ashbury era. You had like all of that type of shit that I feel like by the time you reached the late 70s, 80s, and into the 90s, you had the residual shit of like all of these motherfuckers that did drugs in the 60s and early 70s. Those that didn't die, because I think a lot of, serial killers and people who were doing all that shit in the South, the drugs, there were drugs everywhere. And I think that California is a great place to be homeless too. There's a certain type of person that generally, I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, that just like a normal motherfucker is homeless, because definitely that happens. But there's a lot of people who are homeless and on the street that, are not okay in the head, or ended up on disability or some shit like that. Like, do y'all ever look at, what's it called? Something underbelly. White. I can't remember. It's called white something. I got to look it up. It's called soft white underbelly. And I used to watch their videos on Facebook. Then I got off Facebook and started watching their videos on Instagram. And they obviously put their little blurbs up there, their little reels up there. And what it is this social experiment where basically they record homeless people on Skid Row. Skid Row in LA is fucking crazy. There was also a Skid Row killer. So he was going to be next, but I ended up doing this one. But Skid Row was, this guy is like interviewing like all these different like drug addicts, sex workers, you know what I mean? Just like from Skid Row. I don't know. Back in the day, it used to just be Skid Row. I don't know if he's like switched it up and decided he was going to, travel around a little bit more or what, but he basically interviews and I'm talking about drug addicts, like people who are still actively on drugs. He basically pulls them off the street and interviews them like in a, in like a warehouse or some shit. Is crazy. It's actually very interesting to watch. So it's called Soft White Underbelly. But anyway, so the thing about the Grim Sleeper was that he was operating in South Central, and he was killing a lot of prostitutes and drug addicted women. As we know, in the 80s and 90s, early 90s especially too, so many women in these disadvantaged areas were succumb to crack addiction. And it's terrible to see. Because, it's wild, too, because even though I was alive during that time, I don't have a memory of any of that going on. But, when I think about what I watched in popular culture, whether it be Menace to Society, Boys in the Hood, the music I listened to or whatever, I knew that it was all going on somewhere. Plus, I lived in West Inglewood. There used to be this crackhead named, and I'm sorry, I say crackhead because that's the term that I typically use to refer to a particular type of drug addict. So I don't mean to be offensive. So I'll correct myself. But if I slip, that's because I'm going to just be honest. That's the term that I typically use. But her name was Lulu, and she used to walk around like up and down the street, asshole naked. Like sometimes I'm assuming like she would like get kicked out of the house by a trick or whatever. Because like one time, like when I was growing up in the 90s, I used to live right on 72nd and Laughlin. And I would like sit on the porch with my granny and her friend Charlene, because Charlene was like the best fucking storyteller. Like, I don't know if she was lying or telling the truth, but I swear to God, she was the best storyteller. And so Charlene used to sit on the porch with my granny, and they used to shoot the shit. Sometimes my mama would be out there too, because my mama liked Charlene's stories as well. And, I would get so tired that I would put out like a cot, like a blanket and shit, and like lay on the porch. And this one particular night, and I remember those nights too. Like this is one of them nights you can feel where it's like warm and it's dark. You know what I mean? Like it's hot and you could just hear bugs, and like you could hear not a random scream like a woman, but like somebody yelling at somebody, or you know what I mean? Like the sounds, I'm high as hell. The sounds, the feeling, everything, like it takes me back. But anyway, so I used to sleep on the porch. And then they wake me up and then take me in the house, that type of thing. But anyway, so Lulu one night just fucking walked down the street, asshole naked. She scared the fuck out of me growing up. I used to be like, what is wrong with her? And nobody like set me down and was like, okay, Brittany, this is what a drug addict is. I think it was just like over time. It's weird. Like, as Black people, when did we like, and I'm talking about the people that like kind of grew up in those types of areas, when did you consciously know what you were, exposed to? Because like, I don't remember the first time like it clicked to me, that is a fucking crackhead. I don't know the first time it clicked to me where I was like, that's a sex work. You know what I'm saying? It's weird because it's always a part of you that you had those types of experiences. So you don't always think that they're weird until you're telling a story to somebody. You're like, that shit was actually fucking weird. Like that was my experience as a kid, like seeing a naked crackhead prostitute walk up and down the street. That's wild. So anyway, I wanted to set that scene because that's what I imagine as I'm like reading about this, that time period. And and obviously not the late 80s for me because I was born in the late 80s, but like the more towards the mid to late 80s. But when I think of like the early 90s and things like that, like at some point you were just like, this is somebody's, like I'm imagining that, wow, this is somebody's life. Like I can't believe that this was their experience. I can't believe that they had this much trauma, or I can't believe that their life was that terrible. You know what I'm saying? And so when I was reading about the Grim Sleeper and reading about some of his victims, so much of it was like I was able to see what that woman looked like and actually place her in that environment and actually know what it smells like and know what it sounds. You know what I'm saying? Like, so anyway, so it's interesting. And so I do want to express too, that that's kind of the journey I take when I do these things, because, it's like, I don't have any goals of like getting famous or no shit. Like, that's not my thing. This is more of like an opportunity to express what I'm interested in to other people. And so, in moments like that, you find yourself reading a story and you're like, whoa, this is happening. This happened to somebody for real, but it's so grandiose that you're like, I can't, you know what I mean? Like, I can't believe it. But anyway, and I'm sure Lulu, 30 years ago wasn't thinking that at some point there was going to be some, random girl on a podcast that remembered about her walking down the street naked, I mean, and I don't know where Lulu is. I really hope she cleaned herself up, but I doubt it because she was really messed up back then. Okay, so I'm sorry. I went off on a tangent, but I just kind of wanted to set how I was in my head when I was reading about this shit, because I was like, wow, I kind of know not what they went through, obviously, but I'm just saying I kind of know what that world probably looks like, So we're going to start with, sorry, just 20 minutes of nothingness. We're going to start with the victims. I was going to start with who he was and like all of that stuff, but I feel like it's, excuse me, it's best to go kind of, chronologically what happened. So the first victim was Deborah Jackson. Her body was found on August 10th, 1985. She was a 29-year-old cocktail waitress. What'd be wrong with my throat? Cocktail waitress at Elegant Chateau nightclub. She was taking a bus from home after visiting a friend, and she was shot 3 times in the chest. Her murder was eclipsed by the Night Stalker killing. So the Night Stalker, if you all don't know who that is, there's a great documentary on it on Netflix, but it's Richard Ramirez. He was another one who was just psychologically just fucked up and was killing people in the 80s. Her murder was kind of eclipsed by those killings. Now, at first, too, they thought that maybe Deborah's live-in girlfriend, Beatrice, they thought maybe that she was involved, but they tested her fingerprints and her shoes, and they were not able to find any evidence to prove it. Henrietta Wright, she was found on August 12, 1986. She was a 35-year-old. She was shot twice and covered with the mattress. Her fingerprints were found in the database. The bullets from Henrietta's chest showed that the gun was a .25 caliber gun that was used in the murder of Deborah Jackson. So I'm going to play a clip. Sorry, I took a pause. Sorry. I'm going to play a clip. This is of a 911 emergency call. Listen to this.
I'd like to report a murder or a dead body or something. The address is 1346 East 56th Street in the alley. The guy that dropped her off was driving a white and blue Dodge van 1PZ.
What's your name?
Oh, I'm saying anonymous. I know too many people. Okay then, bye-bye.
Now, it is believed that this is the voice of the killer. The van had a ladder on the back of it, which was practically covered, like it was practically covering the plate, one of those like old school ladders. So a witness seeing the plate from a distance was like virtually impossible, not to mention the fact that the van was registered to a church, and that church was the Cosmopolitan Church. There was no evidence of anything occurring in that van. So why would anyone but the killer call? So the next body that was found was Barbara Ware. She was found January 10th, 1987. She was a 23-year-old. She was shot twice and she was dumped in a pile of garbage. She had just turned 23 2 days prior. Now, Barbara had a serious drug problem and was trying to turn her life around. She was taking classes to become a nurse's aide, and she was a waitress at a barbecue joint. Bernita Sparks, April 15, 1987. She was a 26-year-old. She was shot, strangled, then beaten, then left in a bin covered in garbage. She had been arrested previously on drug charges and for destruction of evidence. Mary Lowe, her body was found on November 1st, 1987. She was 26 years old. She was on her way to a party when she was killed and dumped in an alley. She had 8 arrests on her file for prostitution and grand theft auto, and they were able to connect her to the other .25 caliber slangs. Lucretia Jefferson, her body was found on January 30th, 1988. 22 years old, she was found with a napkin over her face with the word AIDS on it. She was shot twice in the chest, and she was identified by her fingerprints. Alicia Alexander was found on September 11th, 1988. She was 18. She went out to the store and she never returned. She was found by a group of boys walking a dog, and the dog started to dig near a foam rubber mattress, and that's when the boys saw a foot. There was one survivor, at least one known survivor, Anitra Washington, from November 1988. The Grim Sleeper's lone survivor. Anitra was on her way to a party when a man pulled up to her in a Ford Pinto with white racing stripes, asking if she wanted a ride. And when she said she was okay, he proceeded to accuse her of being an angry black woman. So to satisfy his ego, she got in the car with him and he shot her in the chest. She barely made it. Her bullet analysis was inconclusive. Now, we're all aware at this point that this is the time of the crack epidemic, and women had it particularly hard because they resorted to sex work to keep up with their habits. I mean, a lot of prostitutes were murdered at this time, and they were bringing in a lot of potential suspects. One suspect was actually a LA County Sheriff's deputy named Ricky Ross, not to be confused with the drug dealer Ricky Ross. But this Ricky Ross was a black narcotics detective. He was arrested in his car for the quote strawberry murders, because he was we'll talk about strawberry murders, but he was in that area, in what they called the kill area. And so allegedly he was like smoking coke with this fucking prostitute, which, crack. And then LAPD patrol cops said Deputy Ross pulled away in an erratic manner. And as they approached the car, they stopped him, and during the search found a 9mm gun in his trunk. So from there, they started to connect him to murders and shit like that. But also, according to Murderpedia, now the Southside Slayer was what they started to call their task force for some of these murders. And one person they looked into was Louis Crane. He was a black serial killer, killed over 4 to 5 women. He was an unemployed construction worker, 30 years old. He was arrested by the LAPD on May 29, 1987. He was charged with strangling and sexually assaulting a prostitute the same day. Michael Hubert Hughes. Michael Hughes is an American serial killer convicted and sentenced to life without parole for the murders of 4 women in California between 1992 and 1993. And Michael Hughes targeted women who had drug problems, dumping 3 of them in the commercial area of Culver City. The reason why these are important is because these are the people that people were thinking were killing the women that we end up finding were the Grim Sleeper killers. So the fourth one is Chester Turner. He was convicted of killing 14 women, many of whom were found in the area straddling Figueroa, and was among a handful of serial killers in Los Angeles County targeting women during the 1980s and 1990s at the height of the crack epidemic. Daniel Lee Seibert, he committed at least one of the killings, linked to a total of 9 unrelated murders across multiple states from 1979 to 1986, and he was a suspect in 3 other murders. Ivan Hill committed at least one of the killings, linked to a total of 8 unrelated murders from 1979 to 1994. The suspect in now, this reminds me of a joke, and this setup is fucking terrible, but I just posted this Louis C.K. joke. I'm like, yeah, Brittany, are you really quoting Louis C.K.? Yeah, the fuck I am, because he's funny. Shit. He basically said that like the number one cause for harm to women is men. They're men. It's men. And I'm sorry to any men listening. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just quoting Louis C.K. Just saying. But the reason why I am saying it and I'm relating it to this is because I just named 6 men who were killing particularly women. You know what I mean? Like, we can name 6 women that may have killed a man, but Eileen Wuornos, and I know that there are, cases upon cases of women that poison their husbands. Some women who just like black widows, they just fucking like kill every man that they marry. Like, I get that. But I think we can all agree that the number of men that kill women is far greater than the number of women that kill men. So it was also one of those things that, like, when I'm reading these things and I'm like, wow, there's a period where, like, not only was there the Grim Sleeper, but there were also 6 other men and that, like, just killing women left and right. You know what I'm saying? And how many men are possibly out there killing women, like, consistently, that aren't even on the books? Like, we got a serial killer here in Chicago that's been killing women for years. You know, it's kind of the same thing here. But anyway, I'm sorry, I digress. But it made me think of that Louis C.K. joke, because he was just basically like men are the number one danger to women, and yet women don't stop. Like, they don't give up on men. It's like they don't. It's like we are, you know, we typically, women who love men and love being in relationships with men, they keep trying over and over and over again, no matter how dangerous the last experience was, no matter how fucked up the situation was before, 5 times before, no matter how fucked up their fathers were, they still be like, nah, I'm gonna try it again. It's not possible. It's like, it's not possible. So anyway, so now, while all of that was going on, while they're searching for, while they're obviously not knowing, like, everything that who the Grim Sleeper is, they know all these other guys. They set up a South Side Slayer task force to find the killer. So once the bodies started dropping, that's when they were like, okay, who is out there doing this? And that task force was started in 1985. Now, though the murders technically dated all the way back to 1983, but the thing is the Southside Slayer murders were a bit different. The MO was stabbing and strangling prostitutes and drug addicted African American women. But which, you know, also there was a lot of, like, pimp prostitute murder, things like that. But at this point, because the MO was, like, stabbing and strangling prostitutes specifically, the count was like 10. You know, they were like, there's like at least 10 bodies, and, you know, we need to start bringing people in and questioning them. So there was also a $25,000 reward issue. There were coalitions set up because these people were actually very, very tired of hearing the excuses. They wanted more to be done. But unfortunately, too, the community wasn't helping. A lot of people in some of these communities just don't feel comfortable talking to the police, and they're not gonna, you know, have conversations with the police about anything that they see, because half the time too, they're hiding something, some crime that they could be possibly committing. That's one thing that you hear about with a lot of these prostitutes. They didn't report it because they were prostitutes. Well, prostitution is illegal. So ultimately they're thinking, okay, I didn't die, so I might as well just take that loss and not report it, because I'm going to get arrested if I do. You know what I mean? So now the police, of course, decided to keep the investigation under wraps, which led to more heat, because the police did not notify the community officially that there was a serial killer. And so people were really, really upset, because they were like, why wouldn't you tell us? We would need to know. So when Deborah Jackson was killed, the investigators figured if she was killed with a gun, this is likely a different series. And that's what they started kind of calling the Strawberry Murders. That's when they started going, sorry, I hit my mic. That's when they started going and looking at all of those different suspects, because they're like, who on the street is talking about murdering women, you know what I mean? Like, you bring a guy in from a particular area, you start asking him about a crime or his associates, or if his associates brag about killing prostitutes or anything like that, to kind of suss out the type of person you're looking for. So LA, though, was getting spanked by, you know, the late 90s too, because, like, the Grim Sleeper was busy for 25 years. So you have the 80s, 80s. Then you get into the 90s. Then you get into the 2000s. And LA, back to fucking 30s had always had an issue with their politics and with policing. They always had that issue. That's why like even sometimes when you think about like police corruption, like the early like 80s and 90s and shit like that, you're like, yeah, or even the 70s and 60s, and we know civil rights movement, all that other shit. Police have basically always been terrible though, because even when you look in like LA Confidential, things like that. Or, oh God, my favorite reference is to a terrible Los Angeles police department decision was the movie The Changeling with Angelina Jolie, where they basically take her fucking kid and is like, and then present another kid to her and tell her it was her kid. And she's like, it's not my kid. All because the LA police department they couldn't take another hit. They like, we're always in trouble. But when you think about it, LA is huge. Hell, LA's big. So I think that because you got so many police officers, that the likelihood of corruption is, it's more probable than it probably would have been in a town of 5, you know what I mean? Where there's like one sheriff. It's like, yeah, if the police are involved, that motherfucker did it. But in California, it's kind of hard. I would imagine that it's hard to truly police a police department that fucking big. It's huge. So but by the time we sort of kind of get to the tail end of this too, they were dealing in LA with the Rampart scandal, which happened in 1999, because like the LA officials were starting to be pressured to do better and to be better. Because of course, I mean, fuck the coalitions that were created to, help find these women from all the way back in the 80s. Nah, fuck that. Let's wait an entire 10 years and do something about it when we have a scandal and we want to look good. Not when things are better, but when we want to look good. You know what I mean? Like they weren't really they were dealing with so many internal problems that on a political front, they're like, the community has to trust us. And right now they fucking don't. And so the LAPD needed a win. You know what I mean? So they became the leader in the use of DNA evidence. But real quick, if you all don't know what the Rampart scandal is, I'm sure my older folks do. But back in the late 1990s, a veteran of the LAPD, his name was Rafael Perez, he tried to take out 6 pounds of cocaine from an evidence room. And they brought him in for questioning, and he said, is this about the bank robbery? And they're like, the fuck? He's like, is this about the bank robbery? Because apparently there had been a bank robbery in 1997 starring D Mac or David Mac. I don't know if you know that name, if it's familiar to you, but that was Perez's partner. But it was also the David Mac that had robbed a Bank of America in LA for the money to allegedly pay the Muslim that shot Biggie. D Mac comes up a lot. And if I'm not mistaken, he was a blood. They were not asking about the bank robbery though. And that Officer Perez proceeded to fucking snitch on everybody, because they were like, look, we got your ass. So if you want to not get in as much trouble as you're about to get in, we suggest you start dropping names. So the cop had also admitted to stealing cocaine and replacing it with Bisquick. I may have to do an episode on that because there's a lot of moving parts there. But anyway, that was totally off topic, but that was what happened during the Rampart scandal. So LA was kind of just getting beat down by everything that they had going on. So when you fast forward from the Strawberry Murders and from the Southside Slayer, one of the things that ended up being a great benefit was the fact that LAPD became the leader in DNA evidence. They use DNA evidence a lot to solve crimes. It literally helped minimize their searches all the time. So now, how do y'all feel about DNA testing? I know that some people just kind of hate with like 23andMe and shit like that. I ain't you just giving the motherfucker my DNA. I'm like, yeah, well, I do. And I'm here. It's like, come on. Is that really likely? Yeah, nah, I doubt it. If anything, if you're worried about being tested for DNA, it's likely that you committed a crime and you just don't want anybody to find out about it. And I'd rather you just fucking say that. It's like, just say that. Just say that. I shouldn't have to deduce these things. Let's be honest with each other, guys. But anyway, I don't have a problem with DNA shit. Like, to me, fuck it, find them, for so many years, because DNA testing didn't even pop up until 1986 when they started using it for forensic analysis. And to be totally honest, they've been able to solve a lot of crimes with it. But, of course, people are going to use it in a corrupting way. You know what I mean? People are going to have ill uses for it. I totally get that as a concept. You trying to frame a motherfucker. How convenient. You got my DNA. You put it on something. I totally get that as a concept. But I also think the pros kind of outweigh the cons. Like, like in this particular instance, they, by the time they get to Rampart, they've had DNA testing for 13 years. And their biggest thing is like, we got to figure out who is dropping these bodies, So I think you'll see eventually, but it does end up really being a saving grace for these women. Now, here's the thing. Whoever the killer was, he went on a 14-year hiatus and he came back, and there was a murder that happened on March 9th, 2002. That was a girl, Princess Berthamew. She was 15-year-old foster care runaway. As far as I mean, on record at least, this is the youngest Grim Sleeper victim. She was found lying in an overgrown patch of weeds, and a caller had called in to report the body. And when they asked for a phone number, the caller just hung up. Come on, who does that sound like now? Doesn't that sound like our phone caller? Now, Valerie McCorvey, she was found July 11, 2003. She was a 35-year-old. She was strangled and raped. She was found in the bushes. Her DNA matched the DNA found on the other victims. Janisha Peters, she was found January 1st, 2007. Hear me, 2007. 25 years old. She was shot in the back and dumped in the trash. She was found by a homeless man looking through trash for cans. And then she was placed in a large garbage bag under a Christmas tree. So Janisha was the nail in the fucking coffin, so to speak. The LAPD had connected Valerie McCorvey and Princess Berthamew using DNA evidence. They were also able to connect them to 7 previous 80s murders. So during the LAPD investigation, there have been several other killers that they were looking into. As you know, I listed them, and some were actually arrested. Like, some were arrested. And the thing that sucked was like, okay, well, they're arrested, they're in here, and now DNA evidence, like, is not linking them to them. But most of those motherfuckers did kill somebody. They just didn't kill that particular victim. Now, it wasn't until California, they passed the law, Prop 69, that allowed DNA testing of all felons and everyone arrested for certain types of charges. So the LAPD then started another task force. It was called the 800 Task Force, which was composed of 6 homicide detectives. There was Christine Pelichek. She was a writer at LA Weekly. She broke the news, and she's also the writer of the book. I'm going to link it in the show notes, the one that I read. She broke the news that the task force even existed, and she broke the news about the links between the Janisha, which was the last body they found, and the earlier murders in the 80s. Now, Christine was also the one to break the news of the LAPD's silence as well, because they did not alert the community that there was a killer. This also sounds very familiar because during the Mitrice Richardson, they wanted more. There's a killer out there, so everybody's eyes could be open to this, and the women or whomever that are hitchhiking or the ones that are hookers are a little bit on alert, But I think there's also that sadistic shit that sometimes police officers can have where they're like, well, you're kind of cleaning up the streets. Like, no, that's not cleaning up the streets, you dickhead. But anyway, So Christine Pellicek, she working for the LA Weekly, was knocking on doors, making phone calls from damn near the very beginning. I mean, she was the person who was like, I need a story. And then she developed into, we need to find out who did this. Like, she was committed as well as the police department. And obviously the community leaders, because there was a lot of pressure from community leaders. And there was one group, they were called the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Killers. They were an organization that was started by this woman by the name of Margaret Prescott. And this is what this is according to their website. Quote, was found, the Black Coalition Fighting Back Serial Killers was found in the mid 1980s following the police announcement that 11 women were victims of a serial killer in South Los Angeles by anti-racist, anti-poverty, and women's rights campaigner Margaret Prescott. The coalition campaigns to press the police and city officials to prioritize the murders, for the media not to trivialize and malign the victims, and to draw attention to the general lack of resources in and the neglect of South LA and similar communities. They have organized protests, they held press conferences, done community outreach campaigns, and more. I linked them in the show notes if you want to look at their website. Now, Margaret Prescott had been out there since the 80s. Like, she had been out there since the 80s. She was the one that was kind of just like, you all need to put a little more pep in your step. And just because these women are prostitutes or people that you personally don't think are important, they're important. So fuck you. Get out there and find them. That was kind of her attitude. Now, the police, they would have eventually also released the 911 call, which they had never released. And they also continued to investigate that church. You know, they had to cover all their bases. Christine also, the LA Weekly reporter, she would also interview Anitra, who was the lone survivor. Anitra described the killer as, quote, a Black man in his early 30s. He looked neat, tidy, kind of geeky. He wore a black polo shirt tucked into khaki trousers. He was thin, neat, polite, and well-groomed African-American guy. He owned an orange Ford Pinto with a white racing stripe on the hood. And she said it looked like a Hot Wheels toy car. He offered her a ride. After she refused, he told her, that is what is wrong with you Black women. You think you are all that. She said he was persistent. And after some banter back and forth, she got into his car. She was impressed by the car's interior. The gear shift handle was memorable. It was pipped out with a ping pong sized marble ball. And the inside was all white with white diamond pattern upholstery. When she mentioned a party, he deftly invited himself and she said he was welcome to come. He then said that he needed to stop briefly at his uncle's house. They wound through residential roads in his sporty car, ending up on a street whose name she did not take note of. But the polite stranger parked outside a mustard-colored house, partly obscured by hedges. Got out, walked up to the house, briefly talked to someone inside, and returned about 10 minutes later. They began arguing when, quote, he suddenly pulled a small handgun out of a pocket on the driver's side of the Pinto and shot her in the chest as he drove along the residential streets. The killer apparently documented his attacks with a Polaroid camera. Quote, she backed out, but he was startled away by the bright flash of the camera. The man had taken her picture and sexually assaulted her. And she remembers grabbing at him, and the two struggled. She pleaded to be taken to a hospital. He refused. Despite her half-conscious condition, she's almost certain he told her he couldn't take her to the hospital because he didn't want to get caught. End quote. Now, the case was blowing up. The The LAPD decided to have a press conference. As per usual, the police failed to keep the family in the know, and the lead detective, Dennis Kilcoyne, he felt terrible for how things were handled in the past. So he decided it was best to work as a unit, the police and the community, which is like, wow, that is a fucking rare and joyous occasion. We do not see that often. I would also like to add that this was written by Christine Pellicek, who's clearly probably still has a relationship with the LAPD. So I do understand that there's the likelihood that she has a certain soft spot for the police. I'm just saying, saying that as a disclaimer. I acknowledge that as a reality. I don't want you all to think that I'm sitting up here fucking oblivious, But anyway, so they had this press conference. They offered a $500,000 reward for anyone that knew anything. And of course, they got tips. They got tips left and right. And some were useless. Some were credible. And even this one lady was like, hey, it was my husband, that type of shit. And they had 3 sketches drawn up, but nothing happened. Now, what they did know was that the killer shot at close range with a .25 caliber pistol. And they found out that, there was saliva on the breasts. So they knew that the killer had to live in the area because he called from a payphone less than a block away. And the 800 task force was told to take a break. They were like, look, you all have been trying. You tried your best, but y'all spending way too much money and resources and y'all ain't coming up with nothing. So hate to tell you, you need to start looking at some motherfucking fresh cases. That's basically what they told them. Take a break. So the next move, though, while they were on this break, was to search the DNA in the system to see if a family member was arrested for a felony and test it. So on July 2nd, the police, the head of LAPD forensics, and the DOJ leaked up to discuss the results. They got 5 hits with all the same genetic markers linking the DNA found at the crime scene to a relative of the killer. But there was one in particular that was staggering, and that was Christopher Franklin, who's convicted of 2 felonies for weapons, and he was a familial match. So Lonnie Franklin Jr., who did live near the scene of the murders, was the suspect. So they set up a surveillance team. Now, it must have sucked. And I know that it sucked because I watched interviews with Christopher. It sucked for Christopher Franklin to get in trouble and have his DNA match all these other crimes in the 80s and 90s, right? Because he had to deal with whether or not, because, don't get me wrong, he wasn't a saint at all. He didn't kill anybody, at least not that we know of, but he definitely wasn't, you know what I mean? He engaged in some shit. He a street dude. But you go in for 2 felonies for just weapons, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't, crazy. And they run your DNA in the database because you are the one that got in trouble, and they find out that your father may have killed some women. That is terrible. That is terrible, y'all. That's terrible. That is not anything that one would want to happen. And he beat himself up about it. And he look, which I get that. Now, who was Lonnie Franklin? Lonnie was born in LA. He was born in LA on August 30th, 1952, and his mother was Ruby. She was a former beauty school student from Texas, and his father, Lonnie Sr., was a longshoreman. At some point before Lonnie was born, Ruby and Lonnie got into a car accident, which resulted in Ruby being ejected from the car. She may or may not have been pregnant with Lonnie, which could, just saying, at that time, but it's not certain. And Ruby was badly injured. Doctors had to reattach her left ankle. He also had a sister, a younger sister. Her name was Patricia. It was a half sister. And then he had a half brother in Texas. His name was Otis. Now, Otis was from Ruby's previous relationship. Now, Lonnie was sickly as a kid. He had a lot of migraines. He was a poor student. He finally ended up at Dominguez, which is where Eazy-E went. He was studying a trade, and he wasn't book smart, but he was smart when it came to mechanics. He was super flirty, super charming. He was mild mannered and very respectful. And in 1969, at 16, he was arrested for grand theft auto and then burglary the following year. Now, this is when his arrest record started. He was expelled from Dominguez 2 weeks before graduation for getting into an altercation with another student. His father felt like he could join the military. He's like, look, motherfucker, if you ain't gonna read no books and you ain't gonna make no money for real, because you ain't really got no trade, you need to go to the military. So in 1972, he was deployed overseas. Now, while overseas, this American private, I was about to say pirate. This American private, in April of 1974, he and 2 other servicemen were stationed in Stuttgart in West Germany when they stopped to ask a teen, Ingrid, for directions and offered her a ride home. She took the ride. They put a foot-long butcher knife to her throat and repeatedly raped her. Now, according to the LAist, quote, she was approached by a car carrying 3 men. One of the men grabbed her, pulled her inside, and held a knife to her throat. And after a 30-minute drive, the men and Ingrid arrived at a field. The men, including Franklin, each took turns raping her, as she said in court, for the rest of the night. Ingrid testified that she did not believe she would survive the attack, and one of the men photographed the attack. While the men were driving Ingrid home, she convinced the then 21-year-old Franklin to give her his phone number. Franklin was arrested a few days later after police conducted a sting operation where Ingrid arranged to meet him in a train station. Franklin was turned over to the German judicial system, even though there was a deal with Germany for Americans to be reprimanded in American court, but they bypassed that for his ass. They were like, no, y'all deal with him. He was sentenced and served less than 1 year. No one knows why he was released, because he actually got 3 years. And Franklin and his friends denied the attack, with each of them having a different story. Now, it's interesting too, and I hate to say it, but I am. In this particular situation, it's hard to tell who's lying for real. I'm gonna just be 100% frank, because, and we've seen this with athletes and shit, you know, y'all decide to have a gangbang with some random white girl, right? And y'all end up getting carried away, and whatever happens, maybe she gets upset, maybe not, and maybe she leaves and decides to lie. That's one option. The second option, and given, you know, the history of Lonnie Franklin, is that they did rape her. And in this particular instance, even though those 2 possibilities are there, to me, the obvious one is that most likely Lonnie Franklin raped her. Now, psychologically, we could say that maybe he didn't rape her, but because he was accused of raping her, it made him feel like he should rape women. Some people are fucked up in the head like that, where they have this concept of like, well, if you think I did it, then I'm gonna do it anyway. It's like, okay, but come on. That doesn't really help your case later, does it? But, you know, it is one of those very interesting type of like, you know, parallel situations where, I mean, it could have been she had a little situation with these dudes and it didn't go out the way she planned. Don't smoke on a podcast. You know, it didn't go the way she planned, and she was like, I'm getting the fuck up out of here. You motherfuckers raped me, black bitches. You know, she could have. Or it could have been one of those situations where they legitimately raped her. I think the detail of one of the men photographing the attack is a little interesting, but it could have also been a sexual thing. It can go 2 ways. But given Lonnie Franklin and the type of individual that he turned out to be, I would say he probably did rape her. They also claimed it was consensual. They did claim it was consensual, but they said it was consensual even though they couldn't really understand what she was saying. I mean, a juvenile psychiatrist testified that Ingrid was telling the truth, and it was believed that the other men were more involved than Franklin. So it's possible that those other dudes were a little more sadistic than he was, but they convicted Franklin for kidnapping and rape. They also convicted him for another rape of another woman previously. So again, he don't have a great rapport. At this point, hindsight is 2020 though. I mean, there was a first for everybody. So there's no guarantee that he did do this, but at the same time, this could have been the first time that he did it. And maybe he realized he liked it. He was, like I said before, he was sentenced to 3 years. Before coming back to the U.S., he was to have a psych eval, and it was determined that he was able to distinguish right from wrong. He would meet Sylvia when he would return. And can I just say this real quick? That whole, we're just going to do a psych eval to distinguish whether or not you can, to see whether or not you could distinguish from right from wrong. Don't you know that people who are psycho think that what they're doing is right? And then there's that other end of it where they lie they are so, and then again, this is the 70s, but they are so into it that they just think that is who they are. That is what they like. But they know when they're talking to a certain motherfucker that they shouldn't be acting too crazy. I've said this before, but whatever. I just feel like, he knows the difference between right and wrong. Yeah, a lot of criminals do. They just choose not to do anything right. They say, fuck your laws. What I'm doing that's illegal is legal to me. So the fact that I can distinguish between legal and illegal means that I understand what legal is and I understand what the illegal is. Doesn't mean that I pick one, the obvious choice. I don't do things that are legal. I do things that are illegal. To him, illegal is right. The fuck? I really hope I listen back to this and this makes sense, because I don't know where I am in my head. It could be the weed, but it could also be the absinthe, because I'm kind of present, kind of not. kind of know what I'm reading, kind of in my head, all at the same time. So I'm sorry. Now, I swear to drunk, I'm not God. That was corny. That's the name of the show. That just reminded me of Arrested Development, when, you know what I mean? When on Arrested Development, whatever. Did y'all watch Arrested Development? It was so fucking funny. God, whatever. So anyway, watch season 2 of Arrested Development. Where was I? Oh, okay. So he was able to determine that he did know the difference between, distinguish right from wrong. So by the time he gets back home, he meets this woman by the name of Sylvia. They ended up getting married. They had 2 kids, Crystal and Christopher. We know who Christopher is. Now, there's no guarantee whether or not Sylvia knew anything about Franklin. Apparently, she's incredibly elusive. She's a very religious woman. I've never seen her interviewed on absolutely anything. When you watch the documentary, it's funny too, because she kind of, how do I put it? When you watch the documentary, the way she's mentioned is she's not to be fucked with, in a respectful way. Not like she's not to be fucked with, like she's a gangbanger, but in a respectful way. You know what I mean? People on the street, nah, don't talk to her. Nah, leave her out. You know what I mean? But they seem to be a little protective of her. I would assume she's a sweet lady, but I don't have much on Sylvia. But that was Lonnie Franklin's wife. There is a period even on the documentary where they talk about how Lonnie and his wife did not live together. And there's one friend that says that he has never seen Lonnie and her in the same car. So I don't see how you have a 25-year friendship with somebody and you've never seen that friend's spouse in the same car with that other spouse, or, it's just weird. But apparently Franklin had a lot of girlfriends. He had a lot of prostitutes. So basically, when he wasn't with a girl, he would just deal with prostitutes. He was a sexual deviant in that way. And like I said, I don't know at what point, but eventually Sylvia would move out. She would no longer be living with him. Now, he would do random jobs. One was, he was like, back in the day, he was like a mechanic helper. He would leave that job, and then he ended up being a garbage man, which is interesting because he left the bodies in trash. So anyway, he submitted a series of injury claims for disabilities, and some was like, "Oh, I hurt my rotator cuff." He had a bunch of different claims, and then some were conveniently submitted around the time of some of the early murders. So they think somehow that the injuries are possibly, directly connected, but. Franklin was approved for disability, and after that, he wouldn't really have to work again. Even though he did have money, he was like a hood rich dude, though. Like, he had like more money than anybody on the block that he lived on. But he was literally just a criminal. I mean, 20 years later, he's still committing like petty crimes. He had 2 charges for stolen property in 1993 and then 1 in 2003. He had a misdemeanor battery charge in 1997. He had a misdemeanor assault charge in 1999. He had developed a rapport as a hood mechanic. Like, he would steal car parts. He would repair cars. He would sell cars for the Carls, like Junior. He would sell cars for the low. And at 40, he was charged with 6 counts of Grand Theft Auto. He pleaded guilty, and he was responsible for the theft of 30 cars in a 3-month period. They gave Franklin time behind bars. He got 365 days in county and was put on probation for 3 fucking years. Now, he would likely only do 3 months, though. So the police would watch him, but they weren't really looking at him for murder. And he would violate probation, and then he'd end up in jail again. So Lonnie was kind of like a neighborhood gossip and was known throughout the neighborhood, like just in general, like people knew him. He wasn't a drinker. He wasn't a drug abuser. He was still very flirtatious. People thought that he looked good for his age. And he was apparently just like bulky, like he worked out. Now, his neighbors thought that he was a freaky old man. I mean, he always talked about like the women he had sex with. And of course, most neighbors had no interest in talking about that with him. They were like, okay, but they just didn't, and then too, like the neighbors also, they didn't feel like they could trust the police. So they never talked about him or, related him to anything like that. So many people in his neighborhood just thought he was a creepy old man. Now, Franklin's friend, his name was Ray Davis. He testified against him and was able to confirm that he was big into taking pictures of women and sometimes cutting their heads off of the pictures. He would, which we also know is a way to kind of like, bring a human being down to its lowest form by cutting their head off. You kind of take out the human component. So he would hide his dealings with the women in the garage. You know what I mean? He like painted pictures. He took pictures and shit like that. And he would keep all his pictures in the garage. Like, he was just a freak-a-leak. Like, he was a freak. One time, someone spray painted rape on the house. Like, they spray painted it in black. Now, he would name the women based on their features with names like big butt, droopy titties, big legs, shit like that. And he would lie to his wife telling her that he was going out for donuts, but he really would be out picking up women, which I'm like, you going out for donuts? That's what we going with? And it seems like most of his friends knew about his proclivities because he would show them pictures of so many women and he would pick up and sleep with. He wasn't really hiding it from his friends, but he was not showing them that he was a serial killer. So he was big into one-upping people. When he talked about the women he slept with, he would like sometimes like if a dude said like, oh, I slept with 5, he'd be like, oh yeah, I had 8. He was just a weirdo like that. So fast forward, the police are kind of like Remember at a standstill, Rampart happened. They ended up having to, put a pin in their case because they didn't have any new leads. So the next few moves that they made were like mad crucial. Okay. Because at the end of the day, you gotta win here. You all match the DNA to this one particular person. You need to make sure that it sticks. It has to stick in court. So Lonnie was followed 24 hours a day. They were trying to get their hands on any discarded items that would have his DNA on it. They could not fuck this up. I mean, he was followed to his girlfriend's apartment where he made a cell phone call and drove home. He didn't even like throw out a cigarette or any gum. There's no real way to tell if he knew he was being followed or not. But it does seem as though like he may not have been just that type of person to do that type of shit. You know what I'm saying? He clearly wasn't a drinker or a smoker, so he wouldn't have had a cigarette. And even if he had gum, I'm pretty sure that he probably didn't fucking chew gum. Not like that. But on July 5th, they followed him to pick up his girlfriend, Sonia, in his wife's car, by the way, and her 2 daughters. And they were waiting down the street from his house. They drove all the way to Buena Park, where they landed at this kid's establishment. It's like basically a Charles Edward Cheese. That's Chuck E. Cheese. I got that from Dave Chappelle. I don't know why I say that. Charles Edward Cheese. So one of the detectives had a brilliant idea to dress as a busboy. And if he was suspected, he was to say that he was the owner's brother, learning the ropes. So he collected a fork, 2 napkins, 2 plastic cups, and a half-eaten slice of pizza. So, he pulled enough. He separated Lonnie's shit from everybody else's and headed over to the Coles parking lot, which is where, like, I guess a surveillance van was, like, parked or whatever. Now, the piece of pizza collected had cheese on it that solidified hard enough to grab a decent sample. Everything like that they had, like the forks, the napkins, and all the cups and shit, they were just way too oily to hold on to DNA. So now, mind you, Franklin was not apprehended this entire time because his DNA wasn't tested previously. DNA was first used in 1986, and Lonnie had a record dating back all the way to 1989. So we also know that Prop 69 wasn't even a thing. So there is even a run-in with the police mentioned by a friend of Lonnie's named Richard, and he mentioned it in Tales of the Grim Sleeper, where basically they were arrested, and after a few hours, nothing was collected, and they were released. You all got to listen to how many charges he got. Hold on, I'm going to play this.
My name is Lonnie Franklin, LONNIEFRAKLIN.
How many times have you been convicted of receiving stolen property, sir?
Probably around 4 or 5 times.
How about GTA? Grand theft vehicle or auto?
Around 5 times.
How about battery?
Battery? 2 times.
How about assault with force likely to produce great bodily injury? Have you also been convicted of that?
It's a possibility, yes.
How many times?
Once.
How about false imprisonment, sir?
False imprisonment? Once.
So on July 7, 2010, Lonnie was finally arrested. He didn't bother to resist. He was very mild-mannered. He didn't ask any questions. And when he was arrested, he was in his mechanic / like gas attendant uniform. Like they started to search the house and process the scene. His house was a fucking armpit. The police searched this man's house and they found porn. They found pictures of lots of like women in all sorts of poses. They even found the 24 caliber pistol in his jacket pocket. They found women's panties in a toolbox in the garage. They found a Polaroid camera, and then they compiled the photos and they released a missing persons poster with 180 women on it. He had junk everywhere and videos of women he was having sex with. They also found like a bunch of stacked car parts, including like doors and like a bunch of steering wheels and shit with airbags in them, which they literally had to treat as bombs and have detonated. They take him to interrogate him. They showed him photos of the woman, to which he replied, "I don't know them." He just kept saying, "I don't know them." They showed him one victim and he said, "She's heavyset. She's fat." I'm like, this nigga is an asshole. And what's crazy is, like, I personally think that the I don't know them thing is like, technically you probably don't know them. You know, I mean, that can come from a bunch of things. It could come from the fact that he never looked at them as people, so he probably didn't remember what any of them looked like. And then two, he probably didn't know their name because he probably didn't even really ask or care. So yeah, I think that's an easy lie to tell. I don't know them. Yeah, you don't know them most likely. But what they realized very quickly was that they were not going to get a confession, and they didn't. The trial was set for February 16th at February 16th, 2016. I don't know if you remember when he got arrested. He got arrested on July 7th, 2010. They kept him in jail for almost 6 fucking years. His family didn't show up to the court for the trial, but they decided to sit in the spectators gallery with the detectives. Now, during the trial, they convened every 2 weeks. The prosecution had 40 witnesses, relatives of victims. They had Anitra, the sole survivor. They had the opportunity they all had the opportunity to speak. So Anitra was also able to identify Lonnie as her attacker. And one woman who could relate to how Anitra was feeling was Laura Moore. She was a woman who was shot in the chest by Franklin in 1984. She got into the car with him and he allegedly shot her 6 times while laughing at her. So the prosecution case was that Franklin killed the women because he got pleasure from it, and explained that Franklin had gotten off on dumping the bodies like trash. For some reason, that was his thing. The trial lasted almost 3 months. He was charged with 10 homicides, 1 attempted murder, and he was looking at a death penalty or life in prison. Now, the jury the jury reached a verdict on May 5th, 2016, but by July, they, were ready to do the sentencing. They were in the sentencing phase. That is when Ingrid W., who was the woman in Germany, testified of her rape. So Lonnie's attorney, Seymour Amster, he was having a terrible go at it. Like, he tried to use the argument that Lonnie's trash was illegally obtained for testing when trash is considered public property. I mean, quote, Franklin had a reasonable expectation that his leftover food, chewed or unchewed, would be tossed into a garbage pail and then into a dumpster. The judge thought that was complete and total bullshit, and the attorney had an absolute fit. You can see it in a documentary, which, by the way, he's called the Grim Sleeper because he was inactive for 14 years. At least they thought he was. But Amster also tried to argue that Franklin was not the only person who with access to the garage, and that there was no evidence linking him to the photo of Anitra found in the garage wall. So on August 16, 2016, the judge recommended the death penalty at San Quentin, and Lonnie never admitted to his crimes. On March 28, 2022, Lonnie was found dead in his cell. There's no signs of trauma. Lonnie was 67 years old, but as of August of last year, there is no cause of death, and Lonnie's autopsy findings have not been released. My vote, COVID. I think he had COVID, but, whatever. March 28, 2022, I mean, wait, was it 2022? Hold on. Hold the fucking door. I thought he died in 2020. I'm just making sure this wasn't a typo. Nope, he died in 2020. Sorry. So yeah, March 28, 2020. Because I'm like, wait, why does that say 2022? Okay. So March 28, 2020, we know we were in the thick of freaking out about COVID. So, I mean, to me, I'm like, this nigga was in jail. It's likely that he died of COVID. He was 67. So, Lonnie eventually was accused of committing at least one of the Southside Slayer murders. Now, I keep mentioning The Grim Sleeper, the documentary. It's very interesting. It is a documentary that was directed by Nick Broomfield. He did like Eileen Wuornos, shit like that. He did one on Sarah Palin, whatever. Who cares about her? But it was actually a very interesting documentary. And that documentary takes place during the pre-trial phase. So, you know, people's memories of him are pretty fresh. But he had two friends on the documentary that were like, you know, able to kind of like confirm his sexual issues, because Lonnie Franklin had the issue of taking pictures of women. He still kind of had this like voyeur thing, you know what I mean? But he also would like, you know, take panties and things like that. They interviewed like his son's ex-girlfriend who used to like live with him for a period. She talked about the house. I would check out Tales of the Grim Sleeper. It's actually on Plex. Is it called Plex or Plexi? It's on whatever that like free channel is. Just search it on your Roku. So, but yeah, so it was a very interesting documentary. They also had, this one documentary on ID, but I can't find it now. I tried to watch it before I started recording, but for some reason it's just like not up there. I'm like, did they take this down for Black History Month? But JK, because Sam Little is still up there. But one friend on the ID one, he basically testified that he remembers seeing one of the girls in the poster. She was sitting in his van. He apparently had a mattress in the van back in 1989. And then you know, it's just interesting too to get the perspective of like prostitutes, which was in Nick Bloomfield's documentary. You get the perspective from prostitutes too. So I would say check it out. That is definitely something you should watch. I watched that one a couple of times because it's so interesting. So I hope you learned something today. Lonnie Franklin is an actual piece of shit. And you know, whatever's happening to him, whatever happened to him in jail, he deserves. Whatever's happening to him in hell, he deserves, as far as I'm concerned. So it is what it is. But, and then, so next week I will come to you with a little 30-minute bonus episode. Hope you're excited. Once I sober up, I'll remember what it was about. Because I don't. Sorry. And, y'all take care. It's real out here in these streets. Take care, be safe. I'll see y'all next week. Bye.